I'm Jessica Michael. I serve as the marketing manager for Electric Power Engineers, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this webinar to discuss NERC and regional entity audits and compliance. And we hope to share some helpful information with you and welcome questions and discussion at any time. So please feel free to enter your questions or comments in the chat, and the panel will answer them for you. I also wanted to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded and we will share it on our website, epeconsulting.com, and on social media in case you'd like to reference it later or share it with your colleagues. I'm pleased to introduce to you J.C. Culberson, our Director of NERC Regulatory Compliance, along with two knowledgeable members of his team, NERC O&P Compliance Program Manager Lori Thompson and NERC CIP Program Manager Daryl Grumman. And now I'll hand it off to our panel.
All right, thank you very much, Jessica. And I'm going to go ahead and present. I'd like to thank everyone, welcome you, and thank you for showing up to our webinar today. Let's see. Jessica, can we see the screen now? The presentation on the screen?
Yes, it's up.
Okay, excellent, excellent. All right, thank you all again for showing up today. Today we're going to be talking about reliability audits and how to structure your compliance program to really get the most success you can out of the entire audit process. So we'll go ahead and kick this off. So the first thing we need to talk about is the fact that FERC actually affords NERC their authority as the compliance and enforcement agency over the electric sector of the energy sectors here in the United States. Now, that happened in 2007. That's when NERC really officially, got its teeth, so to speak, and what used to be the NERC guides became the NERC standards. And so, having these NERC standards, we had to have a good definition of what the different functional registered entities would be. And so in the beginning, we, NERC started out in this process by identifying the hierarchy of functional entities that would have to comply with those standards. And as such, each standard has an applicability section, so you will know if you're registered as a generator owner or transmission operator. You can go through the standards and see which of those standards and requirements within those standards apply to your entity. So in creating this whole hierarchy, if you will, of functional entities, we started out with the reliability coordinator. They oversee all operations within their RC area. And I'm not going to go through all an explanation of all of the functional registrations. I think we understand who we are and what we are. But to let you know that there are a great deal of requirements within the standards that apply to most of these functional registrations. So the 6 regional entities actually conduct the quote unquote NERC reliability audits. You've got MRO, MPCC CERT, Texas RE or TRE, and WEC over the West. So NERC contracts with these entities to perform a lot of the compliance and monitoring duties that have been assigned to them by FERC. So whenever we talk about NERC audits, just know that it will actually be conducted. That audit will be conducted by your regional entity. And again, I think we're all very well aware of that. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's discussion. So if you are an entity and you find yourself on the audit list for next year, and I think 3 of the 6 are currently published. It's WEC, NPCC, and Texas RE. If you find yourself on those lists, on those schedules, then you will be audited next year, either for SIP or ONP or both. So once you receive, I'm sorry.
Really, I was gonna say really quick, if you don't mind me jumping in for a second, JC.
Go right ahead.
Daryl Grumman here. But I just wanted to add to that they do have a 90-day notification threshold, I guess. So if you were to miss that you were on that list, or let's say there was a change to the schedule or something like that, just because you didn't see it, or there was a change to the schedule, doesn't mean that you're not going to get an appropriate notification, I'd say.
Yes.
Typically, you'll get that 90 days at least, but I think in our experience, most regions are pretty gracious with that, and usually they don't go up against that 90-day window. You usually have more time than that.
Right, and that's a good point. Thanks, Daryl. And so to piggyback onto Daryl's comment, your auditable period starts at, or your audit, sorry, starts at that official notification. Your auditable period starts the first day after your last NERC compliance audit, or if you've not been audited yet, it goes all the way back to your registration date with NERC. So the day that you got your NERC compliance registry or NCR number. So once you get notified officially, you'll know then which standards and requirements the RE will audit. So some of the audit schedules that are posted will have both a SIP and ONP section. So you'll know, whether it's going to be strictly an Ops and Planning 693 standard audit, or a SIP audit, or both. So once you get the official notification, all of the information will be presented to you. And so you'll know which standards, which requirements you need to prepare. So the first thing you need to do would be to first take a look at your RSAWs. That's a Reliability Standard Audit Worksheet. That's what the auditors actually use during the audit. And that sheet has a place for your narrative for the requirements. So you explain in narrative form how you comply with the requirement, what measures you take, what studies you run, how you do it, and all of that. In addition, you'll list out all of your evidentiary files in the RSAW as well. So that really is sort of the guidebook for the auditors during the audit to ask their questions, any follow-ups, and so on and so forth. That will be the sheet that they work from, and they are posted publicly online at NERC or the regional entities, so websites. So you can actually download those RSAWs and get started filling those out at any time. And that's what we do whenever we are developing a NERC compliance program or managing it. We start with the RSAWs, we complete those RSAWs, and from the beginning of the auditable period, right? We help draft the narratives, we put what evidence is going to be in there and all of that. So we have a good starting point on that RSAW, and that's a good rule of thumb. Get those RSAWs started out early, and that way you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on them later on. So next will be evidence gathering. You need to make sure that all of your evidence dates back to the beginning of the auditable period, which is again either your original registration date or the the first date after your last compliance audit. So want to bookend that evidence all the way back to there. If there are certain procedures or studies that have been run or amended in that time that you're using for evidence, and it would impact your narrative or the way that you have complied with the standard, those need to be called out. The appropriate sections that were amended need to be put in there in the RSAW, and really highlighted for the auditor to see that we're still compliant. This process may have changed a little bit, but here's how we comply. So really, if you have a 6-year period and you're not audited in that 6 years, you can see where there can be many revisions of different evidentiary documents that you may have to continue to put into your evidence as different versions so that the auditors have a good trail from the beginning of the auditable period all the way to the end. And it's very important to do that to show that you've not had any gaps in compliance.
Hey, JC,
Mhm.
really quick
Go
to
ahead.
add to that too is that a lot of times, at least in my experience, when you get your audit package, let's just say, for instance, that example you threw up, where you had 6 years or something like that, where you've gone what I guess I would call a longer period of time without being audited. That in the list of standards that they provide to you, they always have the version of the standard. So if you were in a situation where, let's say that you had a couple standards that were revised or something like that during that period of time, those versions of the standards and or requirements should be listed in there. So like if you see, for instance, like a SIP 3-7, you'll also see a SIP 3-8 if the dash 8 is the current version. So they should be listed in the applicable or in the in-scope standards when you get that audit package.
Absolutely. Great point, Daryl. And you'll also, in a similar process, you'll want to ensure that as Daryl noted, that if there is a newer version of the standard, that one is called out and complied with as well. All right. So next, let's talk about SME training. So your subject matter experts are going to be interviewed by NERC staff. So they're going to ask questions from the RSAW, how did you do this? They'll read the narrative. They want the explanation from the SMEs as well. And this also spills over into your system operators if you are a transmission entity, reliability coordinator, or a BA. And even I've seen some GOP operating staff actually sit through some of these interviews as well. It's very important to train those SMEs through witness training is what we call it. It's being able to be quiet when you answer a question is one of the staples of this training, because there are many times where an auditor will stop talking and leave a silence out there and hope that you will fill it in and explain more. Sometimes if the explanation is appropriate and you've certainly proven compliance, you might want to just sit there through the uncomfortable silence for a little bit and let them move on. But that's one of the things that you'll always hear in audits when you're in these interviews is once you've answered the question, don't get chatty, don't elaborate too much, because that can open the doors to other areas and it could draw out the audit longer, or it could create some confusion in some cases and expand the scope of the audit. So it's best just to answer the question and then be quiet. So if there are any questions during this, during my explanations here, feel free to bust right in. Actually, I welcome the the interjection, and I think it makes for a much better learning experience and just a transfer of knowledge here. So the next would be provision to the regional entity and any follow-up questions that they may have. This always happens. You'll provide a sampling of evidence to them. They'll take a look at that and they'll ask for more because you always put your best foot forward. They're always wanting to make sure it's not really that they're trying to get you. It's that they want to ensure that the things that you showed them that were compliant are actually being done, across the board and every day, and not just in the instances that were provided to them in evidence. So you will get plenty of Q&A. You'll get a lot of questions for follow-up evidence, perhaps, all sorts of things that they'll ask for. And that process will go from the initial time that you get your notification and you start providing them with some information. There'll be follow-up all the way through past the end of the audit. So you're going to be in communication with the regional entity a lot throughout this entire process. So next would be, go ahead.
Really
Daryl.
quick. No, sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, so from a cyber perspective, the evidence request tool, it's been revised a couple times over the last few years, but
Yeah.
I would highly encourage any of y'all that are listening or viewing this after the fact is to take a look at that and be familiar with it, because from a SIP perspective, it's intuitive in the sense that it provides you all of the it'll answer a lot of questions, I guess I'll say, that you might have at the beginning of the process, and know what the expectation's going to be for that. As JC was talking about, you'll have the few rounds of questions or RFIs in the beginning of the process. And so that evidence request tool with the giant spreadsheet will answer a lot of those questions from the cyber side of the engagement. And so you'll have like your level 1 items, you'll have level 2 items, and it'll walk you through, and it even gives you examples of like types of things that you could provide and things like that. If you're a medium or a high impact entity, then it gives you guidance as far as how to import or how to list all of your assets and the attributes that are going to be required or expected by the audit staff, as well as it'll give you ideas around to what JC's point was with the sampling. So depending on how many assets you do have, the sampling is going to be relevant to the size of the entity, but it still gives you a little bit of an idea, kind of what to expect. So I say all that just to say that it's a really, I highly encourage to be familiar with that spreadsheet as the evidence request tool, what it looks like, how to navigate through it. Because if you wait until the engagement to be familiar with that spreadsheet, you can lose a lot of time and a lot of cycles just trying to become familiar with it and in the way of populating the data.
Great, thanks, Daryl. That's a good point. The link to the SIP tool, can you guide people to that?
Yeah, no, we can send out a link after this to attendees, and then I think we should be able to append it somewhere within the presentation before we share it out.
Okay, sounds good.
Absolutely.
So next you get to the audit, right? So you've done all this preparation. You've been in constant contact with the regional entity, still have all your hair. So it's time for the audit. And, it is what it is. You know what the requirements are. You know what your narrative is going to be. By this time, you've coached up all of your SMEs and your witnesses. So it's game time. You just do it. And, after the audit, if there are any potential findings of non-compliance, you will be notified then. You'll actually probably be notified during the audit before the audit wrap up on the last day. They'll let you know that there's, even either an evidence gap or we need more to prove this, whatever the case may be. You'll know that before the end, and they'll give you plenty of opportunities to rectify any issue that they have brought up during the audit. So you have all of that going on there in the during the audit. So post-audit activities, if you do have the PV, it's not, it doesn't mean that you're automatically, in the hurt locker. It just means that at that time during the audit, there wasn't enough evidence or narrative provided to the auditor to let them know that it actually, it didn't meet compliance with the requirement. So let's get into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes. During the steady state compliance operations, that would be just regular old compliance management. So you've got You either have your audit, your compliance staff or consultants managing your NERC compliance program for you. And so as you look at the various and sundry NERC requirements that are out there, you're going to want to have people that are on top of it for you, that see what's coming down the pipe for new standards, that will inevitably impact your registration. Just the regular compliance activities that we do, ensuring that all of our RSOLs are started, that we've bookended it back to the appropriate date, that we have, adequate monitoring of all of the systems. To Daryl's point on the SIP side, there's, especially when you get into the medium and high impact facilities, there's a lot more monitoring that needs to happen. But even on the O&P side, it's good to know if you're a transmission entity. Okay, we just did our 5-year transmission plan. I want to make sure that it complies with the appropriate NERC standard requirements. So that's just normal everyday operations, getting everything ready in case you do get notified that there's going to be an audit, but primarily to ensure reliable operations. So once you get your audit notification, don't panic. Everybody goes through it. It's not really as bad as it as it may seem. So at that point, you start gathering evidence. You start the opposite end of the bookending that we talked about. So you're going to want to make sure that you have all of your evidence up to date at that time. So that way you have the beginning point and the end point for your evidence, and any points in between that need to be brought out because of amendments or revisions. So then you're going to submit that evidence package to the regional entity. There will be a secure way of doing that. Depending on the site, there may be different rules for 693 O&P data submittals and the SIP data submittals. I've run into that in the past as well. So submit it all to the regional entity and then wait for their follow-up questions. Again, you train everyone up so that they know what to expect during the audit, that the general stance of the company is very much evident, that you have a good culture of compliance, that all of those things are ingrained into your SMEs and witnesses, operators that are going to be a part of that audit.
JC,
So,
can I just interrupt really quick? I just want to piggyback
absolutely.
on what you said here. I think it's really important. This is Lori Thompson. And so I think it's really important that what you stated about the steady state compliance operations and then getting to the audit notification. And, the first bullet point was saying breathe. I think it's very important to know that if you are doing exactly what is necessary in that first portion of your of the steady state compliance operations, I think entities can be at peace to know that that there shouldn't be that much work that goes into it. There will be extra work as you're preparing for that audit, but if you have a very good solid compliance program, that will definitely help in easing that easing that anxiety when you get that notification.
Thanks, Lori. It's a really good point, and that absolutely is true. You play like you practice. So, your everyday monitoring and compliance operations will lead to a very smooth and less stressful audit experience, we'll say. All right. Thanks again, Lori. That was a really good point. So next in your audit phase, you want to upfront make sure that you and the regional entity representatives, you'll have an audit lead, a team lead there, and coordinate with them on every little detail. I mean, all the way from how is lunch going to be taken care of to, do we have enough conference rooms available for the NERC audit? All that stuff has to be taken care of, so that when you are in front of the regional entity auditors or the NERC auditors, if NERC has representatives there too, if you're in front of them, all of the preparation is made. They, as long as it's easy and seamless, the entire audit goes better. It puts everyone at ease. So during the audit, you're going to have RFIs. They're going to have questions. They're going to want to see different types of evidence from different days. And sometimes that takes some time to sort through, especially when you're talking about like transmission planning studies or that sort of thing, going back and digging through the terabytes of information to find the one specific answer to the question that they had is that's going to happen. So you'll need to have time to respond to those RFIs. And down here on the last bullet point, you'll see it says runners for evidence and requests. You're definitely going to have people that know where this evidence is stored. It's usually compliance staff, or if you're outsourcing to a third party, it will be their staff as well. So go ahead, Daryl.
Sorry, I'm breathing really loud apparently. The point just that you're kind of hit on here with like the relationships and things like that. I think a lot of that goes back to your primary compliance contact, whoever that is registered for your entity, as being that interface between your entity and your region that you're assigned to. And I feel like that I can't overemphasize that enough. I was a PCC for a number of years with a couple different registered entities that were both transmission and generation. And it's very important for the organization to have a working relationship with the registered entity, because it's, I've never experienced a situation where you're going to get like preferential treatment or anything like that. But what I'll say for it is it makes things a lot easier to have difficult conversations. So if you're regularly interacting with them and having conversations, or asking questions, because things are going to come up and they know that. And so if the more you're interacting with them, the better, to a degree, because if you're an entity that never calls the region, never has anything to report, then that's kind of unrealistic in the way of the challenges that we face day to day and within the organization. There's always going to be something that comes up, and so I say that to say that engaging with them is a positive thing. It doesn't have to be a negative thing, and I think through regular interaction and relationship building with them, it kind of lessens the blow, if you will, of having to have an audit engagement or some sort of review from them, because you've already established that rapport. And so a lot of the relationships would already be established at that point. So, yeah. Excellent.
Great points. Thanks, Daryl. The last thing I'm going to say about the audit side here is ensure compliance staff is in the room. You want competent people in the audit that aren't necessarily the ones being asked the questions, but that are there, that have a good idea, good understanding rather, of the requirements and the standards that are being audited. And they can help keep the conversation on track. There have been many audits that I've been a part of where they're, start chasing rabbits down rabbit holes, and then you spent 2 hours on, trying to answer a question that really wasn't relevant to the requirement and the standard in the first place. So having good, competent compliance personnel in the audit room helps keep the conversation pointed, keep from diverting the attention to other areas, and stay on task. Believe it or not, that is very important in an audit, and it happens a lot. So post-audit. So you've wrapped it up. You had your audit presentation from the regional entity on the last day, and now if there is the potential of a violation with the standards, then you'll know about it now. And so now's the time to start addressing that. So mitigation plans would be your first real thing that your product that you can show the regulators. So what you'll do is you'll identify the problem, which happened during the audit potentially. So you identified what the issue is. And after you identify the issue, you have to do sort of an extent of conditions, how far is this issue reaching? And so that starts to give you an idea of how you're going to design your mitigation plan. So mitigation plans, it's very important to jump on these early. If you already have mitigation plans started and really most of the way, if not all the way done, completed, that's very important. It shows the regulators that you took it seriously, that you understood that there was an issue, and you worked quickly to not only keep this problem from happening here again, but you did an analysis to show that across the board, this issue should not rise again. So at this point, you go from compliance staff to enforcement staff. So this is when compliance will still coordinate with enforcement, but you'll have enforcement staff at the regional entity that you will be communicating with now, and they're going to ask questions to sort of determine whether or not this actually is a violation. And they are the ones that the enforcement staff, they're the ones that take into consideration the mitigation plans, all of the efforts that you've taken up to this point to prove that you took it seriously. You amended the problem. You made sure that there are processes in place, controls in place to keep the issue from happening again. So post-audit task tracking is very important. It's very important, as Daryl mentioned earlier, the primary compliance contact, or the PCC, is the person who's going to be leading the audit, because that's the primary compliance contact. That's who NERC and the regional entities will reach out to. So having that person designate, which tasks are being performed by which staff to get the mitigation plans finished, to ensure that all the evidence that is needed is provided. And there are times when it took too long to locate the evidence that the auditors were looking for during the audit. And then 2 days after the audit, like on Tuesday, after the audit that ended on Friday, you'll have, I found the evidence. You can provide that to the enforcement staff, and that will 99 times out of 100, unless there's some extenuating circumstances, that will alleviate the potential violation. And so after your audit, after you've done all of that, you go back to steady state compliance operations. So then you've completed the cycle. So it starts all over again. You had, let's say the audit wrapped up on Friday. The next Monday, your next auditable period begins. And so that's the cycle. And it continues throughout the life cycle of the registered entity.
Well, one thing to keep in mind with those mitigation plans and any potential non-compliance that gets found during that time is to your point with the back to steady state compliance operations, is to just to understand, I guess, and know that audit engagement is kind of like a stick in time, if you will, so that the next time you get audited, any of those activities, those self-reports, potential non-compliance, mitigation plans, all of those types of things, that will all be part of the registered, the regional entity. That'll be all part of their preparation and review for the next audit. So, and I say that because when you go into another engagement, that'll be some of the things that they might look for early on to say, hey, they did a we found this in the last audit. They gave us this mitigation plan and said it was fixed, but have they really fixed it? And what kind of evidence can maybe we look for this time around to make sure that, they indeed continued along that path of making sure that issue didn't pop up again. So, all the requirements and all the standards should get an equal, level of attention. But in those situations where you have something pop up, I would just offer the recommendation to make sure that whatever mitigation actions you're proposing, that it's long-term mitigation, like it's a remediation of the issue so that it doesn't come back up again. and so that you don't have to face those issues on a reoccurring basis.
Excellent. All right. Well, that brings us to the end. Are there any questions? And this is the point where, if you're muted, we can, definitely unmute you and ask away if you'd like.
JC, I did receive some. One of the questions we had was, if we receive a PV during the audit, does that mean we failed the audit?
No, not necessarily. It's that's a good question, and honestly, that is the question that will be on everyone's mind, right? We're so accustomed to a pass fail sort of paradigm that's actually a very valid question. No, it doesn't mean that you failed the audit. It means that, like I touched on earlier, perhaps there wasn't ample time to locate the specific piece of evidence that the auditors asked for, and you can do that later in the enforcement process, and that will alleviate the finding most of the time. It also is strictly a possible violation, a PV. It doesn't mean that it is an actual violation. So then when you start doing your work to to mitigate the issue, if you don't have that evidence and it really was a potential finding, then going through the mitigation plans, getting all that work done helps in the enforcement period. The more helpful you are to them, the better it's going to pay off for you. So in that respect, that helps knock down the if there is going to be a fine, the value of that fine. They take all of your receptiveness to their suggestions, your responsiveness to their questions. They take all that into consideration. And I can tell you, the more responsive you are, the better off you're going to be in the end, for sure.
Okay, and then one of the questions we received is, when should we start preparing RSAWs, and is it worth the effort of keeping them updated in the times of no audit?
For sure.
Yeah. Daryl, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to RSAWs, yes, I would say. I mean, it should be a part of your normal compliance operations to have those things updated. I've been in situations where we did not have that done, and we had multiple business units, whether generation, transmission, distribution, across the board, and trying to get all of that together from different parts of the company and build those narratives on the fly it's a nightmare. And
it is.
And
It takes a long time.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's what a lot of people get, in my experience, they get stuck on is like, well, I can't complete it, so why would I start it if I'm just going to have to change it anyways? And I think the answer to that is have a working document. I mean, largely, I think the standards do change, but not that often across the board, like the whole suite of standards. And your processes are likely not going to change that often either. Obviously, some nuances might, be adjusted from time to time, but and the individuals doing the jobs might change, of course. But when it comes to drafting narratives for your RSAWs, you should be able to come up with a pretty standard boilerplate type of description or narrative of what your process is at a high level. And that way, when you get to the point where you're, in an engagement with a region, that, at that point you're just updating it, or you're doing a validation, verification, approval, whatever it is in your process, to be able to have a finalized document for the audit. You're not going to be in the situation of scrambling and trying to get that together at the last minute. Do you have anything else to add to that, Lori or JC?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head.
It can be ugly.
Yeah. Yes, it takes a long time. If you're starting from scratch, that 90-day period where you're officially notified, that goes by pretty fast, actually. And if you're having to go back and begin all of your narratives, start your RSOLs from a starting point, then from scratch, that eats up a lot of time, and time is a precious commodity at this point. So probably not the best course of action. So yes, keeping those RSOLs up to date as you progress through the year is it's essential to
And
a
even with
successful
your,
compliance
I
audit.
would say even with your internal controls, right? You likely have some sort of internal controls already set up. So just having controls set up for RSOLs specifically, just touch them once a year, you know, at a minimum. Just have a control built in there to say, you know, once a year we're gonna we'll have a task for each standard to be able to review those RSOLs and just go through like a regular process of getting them reviewed and setting eyes on them, so that you can get those simple updates, or you know, the various changes that can occur within your process. You can make sure that that's up to date.
I think it just goes back to what JC was saying earlier in his presentation about that compliance program and your everyday activity. I mean, you guys have both said that, but just to reiterate it, you know, then if you have that ongoing compliance, those ongoing tasks or responsibilities that you do to monitor your compliance program, when it comes down to the audit, you know, that's best practice, so that you're not stressed with having to fill out an RSOL within 90 days.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else have any questions?
We did have a couple more.
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to pick one of them because I think we're getting close on the end of our time here. But what preparation do you recommend when a third party performs work on behalf of an entity?
Good question. Good question. So many entities will employ third parties to help them with their compliance endeavors, and that's a good idea. It's important to note that the registered entity is the entity of record for NERC, and they're the ones that are on the hook, so to speak. So if you employ a third-party consultant, you want to ensure that, one, they know what they're doing and they have a successful track record of this work. So I guess the short answer to that is, and I'll let Lori and Daryl chime in as well, but the short answer is, it is it's your responsibility. So if you are employing a third party to come in and help you, you got to do your due diligence to ensure that they are knowledgeable, they have good track record of success, and they, you know, that you're getting what you need out of them because you're on the hook.
I would say too, you know, it's what you said, SME training, and part of that SME training is knowing exactly, you know, knowing what was involved in, you know, performing the tasks or the requirements, or to get your evidence. And so you want to make sure that you review that work that they performed and do a thorough review of that, and if possible, you know, understand what was involved in that process that the third party did on your behalf, because you're the one that, you know, 9 times out of 10 are going to have to speak to that if questions come up. So you want to make sure you have a full understanding of what went into that.
Yeah, it's not, like JC, like you guys both said, it's not abnormal to have somebody from the outside, you know, playing a major part, especially if you're, I guess, from a cyber perspective, like if you're a low impact entity or something like that, you might not have the staff, right? But that being said, my recommendation, I guess, would be that if you were in an audit or an engagement and you were going to involve your third party, to Lori's point, make sure they're trained, you know, not only in your process, but also from an audit perspective as a witness, but also make sure that they have ownership of your program, right? Like, if you're going to use them in the audit as a witness, really make sure that they know your processes inside out. I mean, I've been in situations where we've actually conducted mock audits and interviewed those third-party contractors just as like audit prep to make sure that they're prepared and that they, you know, are going to represent your entity in the way that you want them to represent your entity. So I would just say maybe a little bit of extra preparation around it, but it's definitely not abnormal to see third parties involved, especially for smaller entities.
Excellent. Great point. Super. So Jessica?
Yeah, I'll close it out. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will share the recorded session to our website and on social media. So please follow us on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in a consult or scheduling a consult about NERC compliance, you can visit epeconsulting.com/contact. And we appreciate your time this morning, and we hope that you'll join us for a future webinar. We'll be sure to share that with you. Also, JC sends out a weekly NERC compliance and regulatory compliance newsletter. And if you'd like to be added to that, please feel free to send me an email and I'll make sure you get added to it. It's just a resource, not a sales piece. It's just a resource for
Sure.
for people in the industry, and provides all kinds of important dates and updates in regards to NERC and regulatory compliance. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great weekend.